Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Debra Pinals, and I serve as a forensic consultant for SMI Adviser. Additionally, I serve as the director of the program in psychiatry, law, and ethics, and as an adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Michigan Medical School. I am also senior medical and forensic advisor for the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. Today, I will be interviewing Mr. John Ramos and Dr. Merrill Rotter about their successful experiences maximizing engagement for individuals with SMI recently released from a carceral setting. Mr. John Ramos brings a unique perspective shaped by both his 17 years in the justice system and his experience living with bipolar disorder. Released in 2020, Mr. Ramos is committed to using his voice to advocate for reintegration support for formerly incarcerated individuals. Dr. Merrill Rotter is a forensic psychiatrist with the New York State Office of Mental Health and an associate clinical professor of psychiatry and director of the Division of Law and Psychiatry at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Dr. Rotter is also medical director of EIC Inc., a social service agency that provides court-based diversion and reentry services for clients with SMI. Your experiences and unique perspectives on re-engaging individuals with serious mental illness after incarceration are powerful. Today, we'll explore what engagement means in this context, identify best practices for success, and learn from real-world experiences in overcoming challenges with treatment retention. Your perspective is crucial in helping us develop stronger support systems for this population, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. I have a few questions for you, and I'm going to start by asking you, Mr. Ramos, to tell us, from your perspective, what does engagement mean to you in the context of recently released individuals with serious mental illness?
Engagement to me means that you're connected as rapidly as possible to the mental health system outside of prison. When I was released from prison, I was released under an OMH program that immediately provided me with an intensive case manager out of an organization called Project Renewal. That intensive case manager did everything for me that I needed to be done in order to be successful out of the street. It started with the OMH discharge planner at the last facility I was in. She arranged for me to be put into a mental health program that provided me with housing, medication, counseling, and other social services that I needed in order to succeed, in order to be able to, when I left prison, ensure that I would not come back, especially in a short period of time. A lot of guys get released from prison. They're not engaged with the mental health system outside of prison, and as a result, they reoffend rapidly within at least a year and a half, and they end up going right back into the system, right back into prison. Now, if it depends upon what you view as the goal of the prison system. If the goal of the prison system is rehabilitation and eventual release, that's a problem that these guys are coming back a year and a half after leaving prison. If you think people should be locked up and stay, well, that's a different kind of system. And it appears that's the kind of system we have where it's more encouraged to reoffend and then reincarcerated than it is to stay on the street. Because of the way I was treated by OMH and by Project Renewal, the agency assigned by OMH to treat me, I can safely say I've been out of prison for 3.5 years. I haven't even gotten a parking ticket. And that's a result of my being placed in therapy as soon as I left out of prison.
Well, your experience really tells a lot about what can be done to help somebody feel like they have a safe holding environment when they leave. I'm going to turn to Dr. Rotter. Maybe you can speak from your experience about what does engagement mean to you in the context of a recently released individual with SMI?
So Mr. Ramos spoke powerfully, really, about the seamless transition and the kind of the system that's being in place to support that. Engagement itself is treatment, actually. I see it as such, and that I would almost say it's 90% of the work. Everything else follows from that, essentially. That relationship building, that trusting relationship, as we'll talk about probably multiple times over the next few minutes, clients re-entering from an carceral setting, from prison or jail, have had reasonable experiences that reasonably lead to lack of trust in authority, lack of trust in the system, lack of trust with clinical providers, even those who have their best interests at heart. And so that the foundation for the work to come, both the connection to treatment and services that Mr. Ramos talked about, but in general, the foundation for recovery really is establishing a supportive relationship with somebody in the community. It doesn't have to be a clinician, but to the extent that I'm a clinician working with clients, that's got to be the first thing I think about and concerned about, is really establishing that engagement, that trusting relationship. Because to be honest, we can set up all the kinds of services, all the beds we could have. If it's not on a foundation of an engaged client and with a really a partnership in recovery, it's a house of cards and it really collapsed. So it really, I just want to argue that engagement is not just the way to get to treatment, it is a critical intervention and the critical foundation for everything else that follows.
In my case, engagement did start from the beginning. It's a good point that Dr. Rotter's bringing up. When I was released from prison, the social service agency that had my case, they were waiting outside the fence. So when the fence opened up and I was allowed to leave prison, there they were in a van to pick me up, to take me to supported housing. And that made a big difference for me. I felt that, listen, somebody must be caring about me in order for them to make the trip to upstate New York to carry me from prison to housing. And along the way, they asked me about my medication, make sure you got it, make sure you're taking it. They asked me about what my needs were. They took me food shopping. They took me clothes shopping. Basically, every material need that I needed was taken care of, which allowed me to focus on my own psychiatric issues.
Yeah, I love that add-on because that really puts into perspective some details about, strategies that people can use to maximize that engagement. I guess I would turn to Dr. Rotter. What other tips do you think that you would bring to bear in addition to what Mr. Ramos said about maximizing engagement?
Being there for the client. I think that being there kind of concept, which is a physical and an emotional connection, is a kind of an important framing for what I'm about to talk about. Because I think the tips really are starting with, as we always say, where the person is, where the client is, in a variety of ways. One of which is really appreciating and validating that ambivalence about trust, and appreciating where that it stems from lots of experiences, and not just trying to force over it or avoid it, but rather validating that it's understandable why that might be the case. That's part of being there and meeting the client where he or she is. In a more concrete way, sometimes it's really, and I'm speaking as a clinician, not making it all about treatment, not making it all about the clinical services the person may actually benefit from, and I certainly believe in, but there are other needs, social needs, really being able to say, and ask yourself the question, what does the client want? Because ultimately, what's going to foster both the engagement is the sense that the client's perspective is validated and appreciated and respected, right? And that leads to kind of a shared decision-making approach where together you figure out what the client's going to benefit from the most, essentially, immediately and then down the road, essentially. And so really taking that kind of more holistic view is important, and starting with, what does the client want, and how can I be there with the client to help them get their needs met? And if there are things that I think are important that they're not ready for yet or don't buy into, that's what the work together is about, to kind of get to a shared understanding of what's going to be most supportive of recovery. And as Mr. Ramos said, what's going to be most supportive of hopefully interrupting the cycle of incarceration and reincarceration.
So, yeah, I love how that is framed as this real partnership, but really kind of, we sometimes as clinicians want to jump ahead, and we have to make sure that we're with the people that we're serving and serving them the way they need to be served. And, recovery is somebody's personal journey, and how do we meet them where they're at and try and help see what are those patterns and things like that.
But to pick up on that, Dr. Pinals, for a moment, just to say, because it does turn it on its head a little bit. Sometimes clinicians believe that you need to get the treatment in order to move on to the other things, right? That the treatment's the bedrock, the medication is the bedrock, and then you get to the other things, whether it's employment or better housing and in fact, in my experience from an engagement perspective, it's the opposite, right? I can work on the other stuff either first or at the same time as I develop a treatment strategy. But waiting for the treatment to take effect, to be started to kick in before we work on the broader goals of the individual is a recipe, frankly, for lack of engagement.
That leads to my next question, which was really, staying power, retention, and care are really hard things to achieve. As you said, Mr. Ramos, very often the system is sort of set up for people to come right back into the carceral setting. And I've been very interested, we've all been very interested in SMI Adviser too, about what are the ways that we help people actually stay in care. It's a huge challenge for many people with SMI and criminal histories. So do you have a story to share of when you put your skills to work to help encourage someone to remain in care?
I have a roommate. In the program that provides my housing, we're assigned roommates. Other people who are suffering from SMI and who have been through incarceration. And my roommate and I have a symbiotic relationship. When it comes appointment time, we know each other's appointments with the clinical staff. And so we remind each other, hey, man, it's time for you to come to your appointment. We remind each other to take our medication. He asked me if I've taken my meds during the day. I ask him. So we have that kind of a symbiotic relationship. And that's an example of a relationship based on trust that I have with my roommate. In terms of like the profession, when I was released from prison, I was assigned an intensive case manager. Emphasis on the word intensive. She was always there for me, a phone call away, and provided me with all the support I needed for everything from psychiatric care to housing, that to make sure that I was programmed to succeed. What you were talking before about the system of speech, I wouldn't say set up, but being geared towards failure is what I avoided when I was released from prison. I was programmed to succeed. So it's not a surprise to me that after 3 years of being on the street, I don't even have a parking ticket on my record. That's because I was programmed to succeed. OMH took care of me. OMH made sure that everything was exactly the way it had to be in order for me to make it out of the street. Unfortunately, I believe OMH relaxed the resources to make that true for everyone. And that's something that as a society, we have to think about. How seriously do we take, mental illness, serious mental illness, and all the people incarcerated, who the majority of whom will eventually be released?
Great. That's a great example. Dr. Rotter, do you have any thoughts or a story about when you personally put your skills to work to help encourage someone to stay in care?
No, it's not the client necessarily who needs to stay engaged in treatment. It's the provider, right? And I just want to, engagement is really a two-way street. And so if we're there, in my experience, and then the story I'll tell you in a moment, the client can also be there. We create the structure and the foundation, the relationship for the client to stay in. And so the story went, we had a client who was released from Rikers Island with a long history, like many of our clients. Rikers Island being the big jail detention facility in New York City. And with a long, typical history of multiple arrests, multiple incarcerations, and he was homeless and really, frankly, needed to get housing. That was a primary need we wanted to meet, and he wanted us to meet, and we were working on it. However, he was at the beginning really unwilling, for understandable reasons, to want to go to a shelter where he could get the official sort of administrative designation that would allow him to get access to the kind of housing he needed, right? And so he would come into the office and we would make recommendations, and he saw some for him, but then disappear again, wouldn't go to the shelter, wouldn't follow through. And it kept happening repeatedly. And what we did, and this is myself, but frankly, my frontline sort of staff working with this client as well, basically took the tack that, we're going to mention the housing just to see how things are at, catch up at the beginning of an interaction with him, and then just sit and talk to him and listen. And we would spend 30, 45 minutes at a time, and he would have lots to talk about. And it wasn't about the housing or his treatment needs. And we just listened and just took the time. And then over time, incrementally, he was willing to consider alternatives, willing to move in a direction. It took a good year for us to get him to actually finish the paperwork, show up at with our support, go to the kind of interview we need to go to in order to get into housing and to be. But the foundation for that, which really I think captured what we're trying to talk about today, was the engagement that we were able to develop as the reentry support for this individual at the case management and the individual level. And really what it took was meeting him where he was at work, which included not wanting to go to a shelter, so not wanting to follow through at the moment, but that didn't mean that we were out. It wasn't my way or the highway. We were still there. Number two, just listening, right? The typical skills we talk about in therapy generally, in motivational interviewing, active listening, mirroring, feeding back what I'm validating, I'm hearing what you're saying, and just listening without necessarily making recommendations. So the active listening, the being there I talked about earlier, and the validating was the foundation for, and the skills we brought to bear that then allowed for the engagement to take place. And what I think typically happens or may happen where engagement doesn't take place often, as I said earlier, the start is that the client, that we have recommendations, the client doesn't want to meet us at those recommendations. And so then we're out. We're not engaged because we're not going to engage with you unless you follow our recommendations. If we stay engaged, the client will be there, not the way we want all the time. Over time, we come to a shared place of that. He ended up really being in the supportive housing placement. He comes back to visit us, even though he's not in the program anymore, just to tell us how he's doing, essentially, because he really connected to these case managers. And when I train case managers in a variety of things about working with justice-involved populations, criminal legal-involved populations, I tell them they're the front lines. They're the most important players. People like me are the back end of this, the psychiatrists. The frontline people, and Mr. Ramos mentioned ICM. Those are the people who really have the power to engage.
Yes, I think it's a team, and everybody's got a role to play. And I guess as a final question that I have for both of you is to think about, we don't always get the opportunity to just talk to our colleagues. We have a psychiatrist here. We've got somebody with lived experience here who functions as a peer. So, Mr. Ramos, what would you tell psychiatrists about your role as a peer and how they can work with you to maximize engagement for people with SMI?
I think that my role as a peer is to try to get across from the patient perspective what's going on, both in my life and what my opinion is of treatment. Something that Ms. Dr. Rotter said, the thing about taking the time to meet the client where they're at. The reason why I ended up in prison is because when I was seeking psychiatric help before I got incarcerated, I did not take it seriously. I did not invest the time necessary in order to get the treatment I needed. I'm an American. I like my fast food, and I want my psychiatry to be fast food. I want the psychiatrist to prescribe a pill I take one time, and then all my problems are solved. It wasn't really explained to me that in order to get the best out of therapy, you got to invest yourself in the therapy, and you got to have a sense that the people who are giving you therapy are invested, that they themselves are buying into the program, and that they are going to be with you throughout the entire program. So I think that my role is, from the patient perspective, is to do what Dr. Rotter said, which is to get the therapist to understand, you got to meet the client where he's at. And if it's going to take a long time for him to get to where you would like him to be, you have to invest that time. But you may also have to realize it may take a while for the guy to get to where you want him to be because of his own issues. There's just no way any of the psychiatrists I've met with before I went to prison were going to have a chance. I didn't give them a chance. And I didn't feel as though they were going to invest the time in me to begin with. Afterwards, while I was in prison, in OMH programs, I met a lot of psychiatrists who were just dynamite. People who are really invested in helping people who are in prison overcome their mental illness and other substance abuse issues. And now also outside of prison, I feel I have a good relationship with my therapist. I feel I have a good relationship with my psychiatrist, and I feel that they care. They're invested in John Ramos. They want John Ramos to succeed. I get that from them. I get that feeling from them, and that tells me, listen, I can't disappoint these people. They believe in me. I've got to believe in them.
What would you like to share, for example, with Mr. Ramos and other people working as peer supporters about the role of psychiatry and how they can work with psychiatrists to best help people with SMI?
For the most part, right, psychiatrists who work in this space, who work with people who have had history of incarceration and the like, are in it for the right reasons, and they're trying their best. They don't necessarily get it. Obviously, conversations like this and all kinds of trainings that are going on nationally are designed to try to get psychiatrists like myself better, you have a deeper understanding of the needs and really the challenges, as well as the opportunities for engagement and productive work and productive shared work. But even those who don't have the necessary experience or the training yet do have a desire to help people. And so the more that, in the same way we can help, the peer specialists are in a position, to help the psychiatrists understand what it is they're trying to help, as opposed to, as happens, I'll be honest, sometimes they get demonized as they're just, pill pushers. They don't really care. They just want to know, etc. In my experience, that's not why we went into this business. There are much better ways of making a living, but we're in it because we believe in it. We're in it because we believe in helping people. And if we're missing the boat, we're missing the boat. But you can be extraordinarily helpful, in the space of helping to say, here's what, talking to a client that I'm having challenges with and helping me understand why the person is not engaging with me as well, right? Helping me understand what the client, what is appreciating or is prioritizing. And here's a critical issue, I think, and maybe make it concrete. One of the ways in which I think psychiatrists miss the boat is ascribing a lot of the issues in the concept of engagement to the issue of insight. The reason the person's not engaged is they don't have insight into their needs for treatment, or they don't have their insight into their situation, essentially. And I think the more relevant approach or perspective is, most of these folks do have some insight. They're prioritizing other things, right? That, if insight means, do you see what I see? They don't see it the same way. And that's where the engagement work needs to take place. And peer specialists can be extraordinarily helpful in helping me as a psychiatrist understand what the client is seeing. It's not that they don't have insight. They have other priorities, other reasons for why we haven't come to a shared place of a treatment plan or an intervention plan. And so peer specialists can help me understand clients more generally, but particularly in individual clients, can help me understand what I can do to tailor my communication to meet the client, as you said, where they are.
That's awesome. That's great. So I really loved this dialogue, and I really want to thank you both for sharing your experiences and knowledge around maximizing engagement to reduce recidivism. I think your practical tips and tactics are really valuable. So some of the things I heard were, thinking about engagement as a foundational part of treatment. Some of what I heard is for Mr. Ramos, just really practically meeting somebody where they're at and showing them really directly that support right from the beginning, that you're there for them to help support them in the best way possible that the person needs. And really just having faith in each other as contributing roles to play in working with people with SMI. Everybody's in it for the right reason. And so how do we help each other understand each other's perspectives, which will then in turn help us with people with SMI who are coming out of carceral settings. I think these pointers will be tremendous as a resource for practitioners listening to this dialogue. The conversation, I think, has really shed a lot of light on critical aspects of improving reintegration success for individuals with SMI. And I really want to thank you for your devotion to the work and your willingness to engage in this dialogue to help enlighten others from your personal experiences in working with people with SMI.
Thank you.
Thank you.